Hi scholars, Miss Yosef here, and welcome back to our second video of the week. This is going to be our last video this week, focusing on coordinate planes and graphing ordered pairs, and next week we're going to move on to a different topic. For today's lesson, what you need is a pencil and a paper. If you don't have a paper, you can use any of the blank pages that are on that math packet, and if you don't have a pencil, you can just grab anything to write with that you have around you. So for today's lesson, we're going to start with fluency. I wanted to do this because this is typically how we start our math classes when we're at school, and it helps jog our memory with things that we've learned in the past so our brains are still fresh. If you need a few minutes, feel free to pause this so you can solve these and write them down on that piece of paper with that pencil, and then hit play whenever you're ready to solve. And I'm going to go ahead and start solving right away, okay? So this first one here, a half times a third. Remember, when we're multiplying fractions, we just multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators. So I know 1 times 1 is 1, and I know 2 times 3 is 6, bringing me to 1/6. And I'm actually going to switch over to a better marker just so that you're able to see this more clearly. Moving on to number 2, when I multiply my numerators, I get 2. And when I multiply my denominators, 4 times 3 becomes 12. Remember our concept of simplifying, where you can simplify. That means finding a number that you can divide into the numerator and into the denominator. When I think of 2 and 12, I know that the number 2 can go into 2, and the number 2 can go into 12 also. So I'm going to simplify by dividing by 2. And my new answer becomes 1/6. If you already solved these and you're playing this to check your answers, but you realize that you did not simplify, I'd like you to pause the video, go back and see which ones you can simplify those, and then play the video so you can check your answers again. Number 3, when I multiply 4/6 by 2/3, I get 8/12. When I think of numbers that I can use to simplify 8/12, I know that 4 can go into 8 and into 12. And when I simplify that, I get 2/3. Number 4, 2/3 times 2/5 becomes 4/15. I cannot simplify 4/15 because there is not a number aside from 1 that can go into 4 and into 15. Moving on to number 5, I'm going to move the paper over just a bit so we can see it better. An 1/8 times 2/5 becomes 2/40, which is a pretty small fraction. And I can simplify 2/40 using the number 2. And when I do that, I know 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 40 divided by 2 is 20. So my fraction becomes 1/20. These are equivalent fractions using simplification. Number 6, 4/5 times 1/2 becomes 4/10. When I simplify that, I can use 2 halves to get 2/5. 7 and 8 is something that we learned just before school closed for this break, and here we're multiplying a mixed number by a fraction and a mixed number by a mixed number. If you remember one of those lessons that we had the previous weeks, every time we see a mixed number, we change it to an improper fraction by using multiplication and addition. So in this case, I would multiply 2 by 1, that's 2. Add that 2 to the numerator, that's 3, and my new improper fraction becomes 3 halves. When I multiply that by 1/3, I would get 3/6. Notice that our answer is now a regular fraction, not an improper fraction, so I don't have to change it to a mixed number. But what I can do to the 3/6 is simplify by 3/3, to which I get 1/2. That should be your final answer for that one. Number 8, same concept, where every time you see a mixed number, you should change it to an improper fraction. And so this 1 and 2/3 here, multiply 3 by the 1, add the 2. So I would get 5/3 times this one here, 4 by the 1, that's 4. Add the 1, which is the numerator, that becomes 5/4. When I multiply, this time I do get an improper fraction. I get 25/12. But I never leave my answer as an improper fraction. Remember, you have to change your answer back to a mixed number using long division. And when you do that, your final answer should become 2 and 1/12. If you have any questions about this fluency, please feel free to reach out to me via call, text, or email, and I'd be happy to help you. We're going to touch more on this in our videos next week. Now what I'd like us to do is move on to some guided practice over the video that we had worked on yesterday. So yesterday I introduced the concept of graphing ordered pairs on a coordinate plane. This here is called a coordinate plane or a coordinate grid. I do not expect you to copy this whole plane down, but what I do expect you is that during this, is that during this video, as I'm plotting these points, I want you to stop the video first, predict where I would plot these points on the grid, and then play the video again just to make sure that the places that you predicted I would plot them were actually correct. This video is intended to help you continue those independent practice pages over this concept because this is something new that we should practice. So before I start, I'm going to label my axes. Think to yourself where my x-axis would be and where my y-axis would be. My y-axis would be here. If you said that, you would be correct. And my x-axis would be here. Oh, let's make sure that is nice and proper. All right. And then what I need to do now is figure out where my origin is. Because every time I need to graph something, I need to start from the origin. So think to yourself where it is. And if you said right here, then you are correct. Now I have all the information that I need to graph and my coordinate plane is labeled. So I'm going to start with the first one, 2, 3, right here for A, 2, 3. The first letter or the first number in your ordered pair, these here are ordered pairs. The first letter or the first number is going to be X and the second number is going to be your y-axis coordinate number. So the first number for A is 2. So I go from the origin along the x-axis all the way to 2. And the second number is 3. So I go up 3 spots along the y-axis. So I'm at 2 and I go 1, 2, 3. And this point right here becomes A. I would like you to, in your head, predict where B, C, D, E, F, and G would be plotted on this plane here. You can pause it at any point, predict, play it, double check that where you predicted was correct, and then you can do so for the remaining ones. And I'm going to go ahead and plot the remaining ones as well. For B, I have 5, 9. That means 5 on the x-axis, 9 on the y-axis. So I start at my origin, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right here. Now I go up 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That part is B. And you can confirm, right? Here's your point B. Track it all the way down to the 5. Track it all the way over to the 9. C, I have 8, 8. Start at my origin. I go over 8 spots on the x-axis and then go up 8 spots on the y-axis right here for C. D and E are two of the trickier ones where you have coordinate points that are zeros. And this is something that I've noticed we might have struggled with in previous times. With D, 0, 10, remember the first number is X, so that means you're not really moving on the X-axis because it's a 0. And instead, you're going to move on the Y-axis, which is 10. So I start at my origin. My X is 0, so I don't need to go over. But my Y is a 10, so I just go up all the way to the 10 on the Y-axis, and I label that D. For E, where I have 6, 0, start at my origin. 6 is my first number, which is X, so I go all the way to 6 on the X-axis. But because my Y is 0, that means I don't need to move up to go to my Y-axis. I just stay where I am and put that as E. F, 2, 9, 2 here from the origin, 2, go all the way up to 9. That's my F. And lastly, G, 3, 8. I start at my origin, go over 3, and go up 8 right there. G. In future lessons, as you do this in 6th grade and 7th grade, this is a concept that you're going to continue on in those grade levels, except instead of just positive numbers like we're doing here, you'll be working with some negative numbers, but that's a really exciting thing to look forward to. I'm going to take this away, and the next guided practice that I'd like us to do is going backwards. So now you have the ordered, now you have the points that are plotted, except you're being asked to read what those points are and write them in the proper ordered pair form. That means that your x-axis has to go first and your y-axis has to go second, not y and then x. This specific concept here is something that has been a bit difficult, so I'd like us to practice this specifically in the order of x comma y, not y comma x. So I'm going to start with this first one here, A, and like before, you can pause this, predict what the answers are, and then play it to confirm if you are correct or not. So starting with A, I'm going to find A on my coordinate plane here, and it's right here. So I know that if I'm writing an ordered pair, x needs to come first, followed by y. So if A is here, I'm going to look down to figure out where it was on my x plane before going up on my y. And it looks like x started at 2. So that means I must have gone from the origin up over 2 and then gone up. So 2 is the x. And then the y here looks like it's 11. To give you a hint here, it might help if you trace down and over until you get to the planes, or until you get to the axes, I'm sorry. And once you get down here to the x-axis, you see 2, that's your x-coordinate. And once you get over, you see 11 for the y-axis, 11 for the y-axis. And we did not label our axes here, and that was my mistake, but I'm going to make sure that I do that now. That is where you should always start anytime you're working with a coordinate plane. Something that I want you to take note of here is that when you're given the point and you're graphing the ordered pair, you're kind of going backwards when you're figuring out the x and the y's. For example, here with B, B is here, I want to figure out the x coordinate for B, and typically we go over this way when we're doing x and we go over this way when we're doing y. But I have to trace B down until I get to my x-axis. We're used to going right for our x-axis, but now I have to go down and find that number 7 that I traced it to. So that means that it was on the 7 coordinate for the x-axis. Then I trace B all the way over until I get to the y-axis and find that 11 was the point at which I had a y-coordinate. You can confirm this, right? You can look at B and say, okay, B is 7, 11. Let me make sure that my ordered pair matches the dot that I'm given. I can start at the origin, go over 7 on the x-axis, all right? Go up 11 on the y-axis, and I do get to B. So your answer is correct, and that is a way that you can check your work too. For C, C is right here. I can trace it down all the way to this 5. So 5 is going to be my x-coordinate, and 7 is going to be my y-coordinate. This is a bit of a newer concept that was not touched on very heavily in yesterday's video, so I would like us to very intentionally practice this now and during our independent practice later. For D, notice that D is on the axis. Anytime you see a point that is on the y-axis or the x-axis, that means one of your coordinates is 0. And this is what I mean. For D, you can trace it down here, but D traces down to the origin, which means that because it didn't move over into the x-axis in any way, my x-coordinate for D has to be 0. And the y-coordinate for D has to be 3. Because it is sitting on the y-coordinate. It is on the y-coordinate. Or sorry, it is on the y-axis. E is the opposite. Notice E is on the x-axis. That means that because it didn't move up on the axis, then it does not have a coordinate for y. So for E,